I was very fortunate also in another respect that I have been made younger today by Shireen Naqvi, who grows younger every time I see her. I've just called her Sweet 16 because this is your 17th year. And mashallah, she looks as resonant and vibrant today as she did 16 years ago when we discussed this concept. And I want to compliment Hamad, Umair, the whole marvelous team for making it possible to bring together these 310 marvelous representatives of Pakistan. Bahut khoob, bahut mubarak ho aapko. But arithmetic is important. Arithmetic is important because figures are always important. This symbol of the Peak-Friens Pied Piper is not just 19 years old, not even 25 years old. When all of you were still up in heaven, waiting to come down, in the year 1972, 2 years after we set up an agency called M&J Advertising in Pakistan and in Karachi, EBM chose us as their advertising company. That happened in 1970. And I was writing and directing their commercials. And one day, this flash of inspiration came to my mind. How do you take a symbol like the Pied Piper, which is, by the way, a negative symbol? You know what the Pied Piper was? Do you know who the Pied Piper was? He was this marvelously gifted musician who played the pipe, and there was a town called Hamelin in Germany which was infested by rats, and they didn't know how to get rid of the rats. They heard of this magical musician called the Pied Piper, and they promised him that if you get rid of the rats from our little town, we shall reward you. So the Pied Piper came and he played his beautiful pipe, and the rats were so captivated by that sound that they followed him out of the town, ridding the town once and for all of that menace, and they were sunk into some oblivion. However, when the Pied Piper demanded his fair reward, the people of Hamelin didn't offer him what they had promised him. So what did the Pied Piper do? He decided to take revenge by playing the flute, the pipe, in such a way that the children of Hamelin followed him out of the town and away. So that is basically a very negative process. But what intrigued me was, why can't we convert this into a positive process? A process of dislocating the negative with a positive, making the Pied Piper into a symbol of quality, of values, of progress and change for the better. At that time, the biscuit industry was very primitive, and EBM was the leader. So lo and behold, we used him as an advertising figure, and we filmed in Murray, we filmed in Karachi, and people loved it, loved the music. They still use the music. After some time, EBM got tired of the Pied Piper, and they said, Javed Sahab, why don't you come up with something new? So I said, are you sure? He said, yes. So we gave them some new concept, which was also fine. But lo and behold, after a few weeks, they started getting a negative feedback from their customers who would go to the shops and say, well, what happened to the Pied Piper? And they then decided to bring him back. And not just bring him back, this is the first time in advertising history, in Pakistan at least, that an advertising symbol became part of the packaging. It normally happens the other way around. Advertising takes something from the packaging and then puts it into advertising. So, when we congratulate EBM, we are congratulating longevity. And if it started in 72, and we are now in 2018, fortunately for EBM, I don't have anything to do with their advertising now. I left advertising many decades ago, but they persevere with it, and they are easily the country's most progressive packaged food company. biscuits. It just happens to be their incidental. Now your time is still 9:15. How polite this is. I've just barely begun. 9:15 in the night, no? Not in the morning. Don't worry, I'm not going to take too much time. I want to share this experience with you because there is a point to it. It's now 28 years of the 20th century and another 18. So that makes it 4.5 decades. And this longevity, this survivability, this sustainability is reflected in how the school of leadership has evolved over the last 16 plus years. It is a testament to the sincerity, the substance, and the capacity to sustain the vision that they had when they started it. And it is possible because each year there are young people like you representing talent, representing hope and aspirations. From, I believe, in this assembly today, there are people from about 64 locations across Pakistan. MashaAllah, let us celebrate the diversity of this assembly. Bahut khoob. And just as you represent a new generation of Pakistanis coming up, you're only slightly older than I am. I'm only 14. You are 16, I presume, huh? And it's so good to be amongst older people for a change, yeah? It's all in the mind. It's all in the mind, young people. The theme is, it's time. Huh? It's time. And what is time? No one has quite defined what is time. But remember one thing, the first piece of unwanted advice I'm going to give you. Never ever say those lethal words. Keji, why couldn't I do it? I didn't have the time. I didn't have the time. My God, I find young people saying it. I find not so young people saying it. And I'm appalled. How can they not have time? Time is the only thing you have. And the moment you say, I didn't have the time, or I don't have the time, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will never have the time. So don't say it, because the mind is a very mischievous character. The moment you lock the mind with words, that's exactly what will happen to you. You won't have the time. The reason I have the time, and I have to be humble and modest when I say so, I'm not being arrogant and I'm not trying to show off, which probably I am. But I just want you to know that I don't only write, I make films. I do social work, not just in Tharparkar, I work across the country. I travel. I have 2 children, Javed Jabbar, a very gifted director, Kamal Jabbar, a barrister. I speak with them almost every day. I'm married to Shabnam, charming, delightful wife who can put up with me. And I find life so fulfilling, and I manage to do everything, and I write every week. And I travel to Lahore and go back this evening. I have the time. So a person can have the time if you have the will and the vision and you know what you want to do with your time. If you know what you want to do with your time, you will always have the time. Today's subject, it's time, has a lot to do with Pakistan. You know how many weeks' notice at which Pakistan was created? It is the only nation state in world history created at 10 weeks' notice. This great conference must have taken twice that duration to just put together, just bringing 310 people together. And here we are, 3rd June 1947, the British Viceroy arrogantly announces, I have solved the problem. Pakistan and India will come into being on the 14th of August, 15th of August, midnight, 1947. 10 weeks. That was a joke, a sick joke. And yet look at the resilience of this incredible people who were not even one nation, We are not a historic nation like the Chinese or the Turkish or the Russian or the Egyptian people. We are not a nation in that sense. Ethnically, we are not a nation. And yet we came together and we survived the trauma of 1971, when because of our own blunders and India's intervention, we lost East Pakistan. Even then we survived. 1971, 2018, 46 years against all the odds. So Pakistan is a living, breathing example of the fact that time is how you use it and how you can conquer it. I don't know whether you can conquer it, because time is not something you hold. Time is just something you use. But let me come to this marvelous formulation that has been given to me. Philosophy, psychology, and possibilities. And I'll try and use 3 or 4 minutes for each of them, so that I don't get this terrible slip again from that beautiful woman called Shirin Naqvi. How do you go about talking about philosophy? I wish philosophy was a compulsory subject right up to graduation, just like civics. Do they have civics in your curriculum? G? Yes and no. Well, that's an example of a segmented, dichotomous, divided education system. We are not producing one kind of young Pakistani. We are producing 3 kinds of Pakistan simultaneously. One in the madrasas, one in the government school metric system, and one in the Cambridge O-level, A-level system. 3 different Pakistans growing up together simultaneously, barely communicating with each other. Not just because of socio-economic differences, but because of the basic content that they are being exposed to. So how do you philosophize about a country like Pakistan? Well, there's one straight way to do it. Think of the two-nation theory as the philosophical foundation of this place that we live in called Pakistan. And what is the two-nation theory? The two-nation theory basically means that Muslims are distinct from non-Muslims. And when I say non-Muslims such as Hindus, I don't mean Hindus in a negative sense. I just mean that we are different because our beliefs are different, our diet is different, our social mores and customs are different. And this concept developed either when the first Muslim came from Central Asia or West Asia soon after the Prophet, peace be upon him, brought the message of Islam. And it's been growing and germinating for 1300 years, 1200 years. And finally in 1857, when a Muslim minority who had been ruling over a non-Muslim majority for hundreds of years, first through the Delhi Sultanate, then the Mughal Empire, the dear British, the civilized British came and removed Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor. And then the British didn't just remove him and sent him off to Rangoon. The British epitome of civilization and culture cold-bloodedly murdered his 2 sons so that the Mughal family would come to an end. The concept of succession would end. Cold-blooded execution without a trial. The Muslims went into trauma because they had been so used to ruling, Badshah, that they were so completely dislocated. What was going to be their identity? Would now they become the minority? And the Hindus were obviously in a majority. And Sir Syed Ahmad Khan began to tell Muslims, catch up with the British, catch up with the Hindus, become educated, learn English. And there were several other people who did it. And then in the 20th century, this remarkable man called Chaudhry Rahmat Ali, a young student like you, just a few years older, sitting in Cambridge University, in his early 20s, writes a pamphlet called Now or Never, January 1933, and says there should be a country called Pakistan. He didn't have the I in Pakistan, Pakistan. And this is where it should be. And this man invents the name. And then in 1930, even though Allama Iqbal 3 years earlier had spoken of a Muslim majority area, Allama Iqbal never used the word Pakistan. Even Mr. Jinnah didn't use the word Pakistan till 1940 in the Lahore Resolution adopted here. The Lahore Resolution has no reference to the two-nation theory, even though Mr. Jinnah used many sentences originally written by Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. But you know the ironies of history? It's not taught to you in your schools or your colleges. What happened to Chaudhry Rahmat Ali? He was such an eccentric. Perhaps you can't blame the government of Pakistan for what they did. But in August 1948, after Pakistan was created, he applies for a passport. He wants to be proudly carrying a Pakistan passport. The passport is not issued to him. And then on the 1st of October, he is given a notice. If you do not leave Pakistan within 48 hours, you will be arrested. With his broken heart, he retreats to Cambridge and dies very sadly, 51, is buried there. But that's the irony of history. And he leaves behind, for Mr. Jinnah, the concept of a country called Pakistan. To his great credit, if it hadn't been for Mr. Jinnah's steel-like determination, we would not be blessed with this incredible country called Pakistan. And let me just warn you cautiously, because there are very few minutes left for my limit, that there are many people in our country today, especially in the English-speaking part, to which I also belong. But just because you use English doesn't mean you have to surrender your psyche to English-speaking parts of our society, who think, you know, in 1971 when East Pakistan left Pakistan, the majority left. There were 53% of the population. They say the two-nation theory died because they said we don't want to be part of Pakistan. But my point is, in fact, the two-nation theory became stronger when East Pakistan became Bangladesh. Because Bangladesh does not want to go and re-merge itself into Indian, Hindu-dominated West Bengal. Bangladesh is proud of being Muslim, predominantly Muslim. We may not have good relations with them today, but they are very, very proud. In fact, in some ways, they are better Muslims than Pakistani Muslims. They're so fervent. So the two-nation theory is the foundation for Pakistan. And that's why we exist. But it's not just about some theory. It's about us also, each of us. What does philosophy mean? If you say we are a nation and there's no unanimity in how to define a nation, the Oxford English Dictionary defines a nation but does not use the word religion. It says a people united by land, by language, by culture, but it does not say religion. And yet, we are a country, 97% of us are Muslims. And yet we are so diverse. The diversity is so incredible, not just amongst Muslims, Shias, Sunnis, Bohris, Ismailis, Ahle Sunnat, Ahle Hadith. It is in the ethnicity, 70 languages and dialects spoken in Pakistan. Fantastic. 3% non-Muslims, what vibrant non-Muslims. The backbone of Sindh's agriculture, the Hindu Dalit tribes, who we terribly call untouchables. Wow. So, the second part of philosophy should be the singularity of humanity. Not humanitarianism, which is another great paragon of virtue personified by Sattar Idi. Humanitarianism is the act of carrying out your compassion and your kindness. But humanism is recognizing and respecting the equality of every human being, regardless of religion, height, color, sex, gender, blah, blah, blah. Humanism. Insaniyat. So, Pakistaniyat hai insaniyat, और इंसानियत बनती है बाज़ दफ़ा पाकिस्तानियत. That's philosophy, both collectively and individually. The second, what is psychology? Oh, the psychology has to deal with the human mind. My God, the human mind is more mysterious, I think, than the universe. And remember what we see on an open sky, when there's a beautiful, fully lit sky. There are no lights to disturb you. Go out into the desert, and I have that marvelous experience. You see the sky and its splendor, and yet, remember, we are only seeing 5% of the universe. 95% is beyond our sight. That's how huge and infinite this universe is. I think the human mind is even more complex and unknown than the universe. My God, you can't look into the human mind. It's impossible. So how do you go about understanding psychology? What is psychology? It's made up of genes. It's made up of DNA, what you inherit from your grandparents, from your parents. And it's by observed behavior. And it's about being a slave, being born a slave. Mubarak ho. Aap sab ghulam paida hue, meri tarah. Ek French philosopher the called Rousseau, who said, man is born free, but is everywhere in chains. I beg to disagree with Rousseau. When I see him in heaven or hell, I will tell him, I'm sorry, sir. I think man is born a slave. Why? Because we don't choose our DNA. I didn't choose the color of my skin. I didn't choose where I was born, why I was born. What faith my parents have became my faith. I didn't choose anything. But it is the actions that I took that shaped my life. So you become free with every day of your life, the decisions you take. When I was 6, my parents divorced. And the worst thing about the divorce was that they were beautiful people, both of them, but they just couldn't get along. And then they asked this 6-year-old child, choose, who do you want to be? Oh, it was like putting my soul on fire. And sometimes that fire still burns in me, even though both of them have gone. I suppose the choice was, should I become bitter and blame everything on my parents? Look at them, what a mess they made of their life and my life. They didn't make a mess, but it certainly left a scar. But I didn't let that bitterness, that experience overwhelm me. So, you choose. I chose to transcend my parental divorce. And I choose to be happy with whatever life gives me or what I make of life. So psychology is about taking your DNA, your genes, and taking your observed experience and learning from life and then making it happen. The third and the last, which is possibilities. Oh, possibilities. The very word is tantalizing. Are there any limits? Are there any limits to human ingenuity, to the capacity of this mind to produce miracles, to produce this machine called curiosity, which at this moment in time is sitting on the planet Mars, millions of miles away. It takes 7 months to get to Mars. And without any wiring, curiosity does exactly what it is told to do by technicians in NASA. And it sends back signals and pictures. Fantastic. Possibilities. But if curiosity is doing that there, what about ourselves here? The Prophet said it so beautifully. He said, the real jihad is the conquest of self. The conquest of self. Very difficult. Very difficult, because every day there come moments in life, whether you choose to be angry, choose to be truthful, when you want to say a small lie, get away with it, say 19 instead of 20, choices. So the possibilities are enormous. Pakistan is a living, breathing example of what the possibilities are. Read my book. I love selling my books. My 14th book was called Pakistan, Unique Origins, Unique Destiny with a question mark. The reason I'm mentioning it is it gives 8 reasons why we are the most uniquely created nation state on earth, and it lists 60 of our strengths and 40 weaknesses. 40 weaknesses. We have to recognize both and take strong action to prevent the weaknesses from overwhelming our strengths. Thank you very much for your patience. I wish you good health and success.